On a crisp Canberra day, two senior American intelligence officials arrive in the Australian capital on a top-secret mission. They're here to break some shocking news to Australia's spy agency, ASIO.
This was a grave national security breach, the extent of which is hard to fathom.
The pair from the CIA and the FBI are ushered into ASIO headquarters to brief the Acting Director General alone. No one else is allowed in the room. ASIO has been warned for years that it's been penetrated by Russia's feared spy agency, the KGB. But repeated inquiries have found nothing. Now the Americans deliver a bombshell, provided by a KGB insider.
Oh, we got a spy inside ASIO. I mean, it was kind of like, wow.
Information sourced from Russian KGB defectors triggers the most extensive mole hunt in the history of Australia's intelligence services.
Red alarm bells are going everywhere. This was a critical asset. And I think when people understand just how critical, it will shock many.
What those investigations find has been kept secret for 30 years, until now.
What was your reaction when you learned that there was a traitor in your office, in the team that you worked on?
Hate, utter frustration at realising that the best years of my life were spent working for an opponent. Sadness for Australia and for this service that I work for.
Now, Four Corners reveals the identity of the mole and the full extent of his betrayal in Australia's greatest untold spy story. It's autumn 1977. An early chill is beginning to creep over the Australian capital. And a wintry pall hangs over international affairs.
The Americans are not completely powerless to keep an eye on the Kremlin. It's a question of whether Uncle Sam can trust them to abide by the critics insist that the Soviets have the desire to circumvent halting the spread of nuclear weapons.
It was a very sombre, very serious time because of the Cold War was really at its apogee, at its absolute peak. So we had no doubt whatsoever that in terms of where Australia sat in the global geopolitical situation, we were, in a way, fighting to preserve democracy. It was high stakes and people got hurt. Every action had consequences.
Life or death?
Life or death in some cases.
My own service was in what I would call an intelligence battle with the KGB at that point in time. In Australia, it's the same thing as we were getting up to in Canada. They were trying to, first of all, penetrate the intelligence service. If you can penetrate the counterintelligence component of an adversary service, you can control them.
Australia is seen by the Soviets as a backdoor into the secrets shared by the Five Eyes intelligence partnership with the US, the UK, Canada and New Zealand. What secrets did we have that the KGB wanted at the time?
Quintessentially, our access to American secrets, Pine Gap and Naranga, they were crucial to our ability to warn America of a nuclear strike. Pine Gap was the most powerful American intelligence facility outside of the United States. There was the fact we would receive from the CIA's top-secret code word assessments, which I read once a year, Soviet nuclear threat capabilities. There was plenty of potentially rich pickings for an active Soviet embassy, and by hell were they active in the late 70s through the 1980s.
The Soviet embassy in Canberra is bristling with KGB and military intelligence spies.
The overwhelming purpose of the Soviet embassy in Canberra and in Australia, its diplomatic presence in Australia, was about intelligence.
Inside the embassy, the KGB station chief, Geronty Lazovic, is about to strike gold. In his daily mail delivery, he finds an anonymous letter addressed personally to him, offering classified intelligence in exchange for money to be paid into a post office box in Canberra.
So the ASIO mole wrote a letter addressed to Lazovic. He writes it directly to Lazovic, and he includes in this letter a sample of the kind of information that he's able to provide. So he's put in there something that is going to, interest them, and he's saying it's for money.
Lazovic is stunned. An approach like this is too critical for him to handle alone. He needs instructions from Moscow.
So Lazovic does what any officer should do. He sends the actual documents to Moscow, and they end up in Directorate K, which handles so-called, and I use a KGB term of art here, precious agents, really important agents, will be handled by Directorate K. Clearly, this individual, to them, is an important person. Obviously, he's in ASIO, and obviously he has access to top-secret SCI material from Five Eyes.
In Moscow, the package sent by Lazovic lands on the desk of the infamous KGB spy master Oleg Kalugin, who runs Directorate K. Kalugin initially suspects it's a trap, as he told Four Corners in 2004.
Well, initially we had, as it happens usually, some suspicions whether there was a plant or double agent, someone who would get us involved in a major scandal.
Kalugin needs to verify that the top-secret material is authentic. So he takes it to the notorious British defector Kim Philby, a member of the Cambridge spy ring, who fled to Moscow in 1963.
We deleted all references to Australia, and I showed this document to Kim Philby and asked me if this document was genuine. To my amazement, he said it's genuine and it comes from Australia.
At KGB headquarters, the spy masters are jubilant. The Soviets now have a mole inside a Five Eyes intelligence service. For at least 2 years, the ASIO traitor will be the Russians' only insider, giving them access to American and British secrets.
Once we penetrate ASIO, we have actually some penetration, and sometimes very deep penetration, of the CIA, of the FBI, and the British MI5 and MI6. That's precisely what happened.
This was a critical asset, and I think when people understand just how critical, it will shock many.
How senior was this mole?
He was the supervisor of the espionage unit in Sydney. So he had access to and was actually running the operations against the KGB and satellite desk.
So how significant was it for the KGB to have secured the services of someone in this position?
Very significant.
Former Canadian intelligence officer Dan Malvena has spent decades working with Western spy agencies around the world. His friends and contacts include major KGB players like the former spy master General Kalugin and the famous KGB colonel Oleg Gordievsky, who spied for Britain's MI6 for years before defecting to the West. Dan Malvena has investigated the activities of the ASIO mole for a forthcoming book.
Gordievsky once told me that he was in Moscow in his department, a part of which was Australia, and he went into the department one day and he saw Kalugin coming into the department from Directorate K and meeting with his boss, and apparently coming in a couple of times. And he realized immediately, well, Kalugin from Directorate K is here. These are the guys that run all the penetrations of the adversary services. We must have a penetration of ASIO, and there was kind of euphoria inside the department. Oh, we got a spy inside ASIO. I mean, it was kind of like, wow.
The work being done by Dan Mulvaney is breathtaking.
Neil Fergus is an international security expert and highly respected advisor to Western intelligence agencies who's worked closely with Dan Mulvaney.
He has painstakingly over many years spoken to some of the most senior Western counterintelligence heads. He speaks to them regularly. He's speaking to a number of former KGB officers. He has had access, better access than any other person I know of, to living Russian defectors.
The Soviets give their new mole a code name, Mira, which means peace in Russian. The mole has top secret security clearance, which gives him access to many of Australia's most prized secrets. He works out of ASIO's New South Wales office, located in this heritage-listed building at Kirribilli on the shores of Sydney Harbour. His colleagues here suspect nothing.
You worked with the man, he was your boss. Can you tell me about him? What was he like?
The word that springs to mind is nondescript. He was a supervisor, so he was running a team, and I was part of that team. But somehow, somewhere along the line, something happened. Something happened to him, something really big, or something snapped. And, we're trained to pick these things up. And this guy flew under the radar. So he wouldn't be the last person I'd suspect, but he wouldn't be the first.
The KGB's man in Canberra, Lazovic, returns to Moscow in July 1977. He'll be appointed to the rank of general and given one of the Soviet Union's highest awards.
So Lazovic gets recalled and goes back to Moscow as something of a hero. And he gets an award of the Red Star, which is traditionally, if you're the Order of the Red Star is given to somebody, it was a prestigious order given to somebody who's made a significant recruitment.
While ASIO has no idea it now harbours a traitor, the new mole proves difficult to manage for the KGB. He steadfastly refuses to reveal his identity to his new handlers.
Of course, the mole, like most moles, would prefer to remain totally anonymous. And the KGB would prefer to know who you are and what your motivation is. And this is from many conversations with General Kalugin. They were sending messages to Canberra saying, look, we need to take control of this operation.
We're talking about a mole who was an experienced operations person. This person was highly skilled. Initially, this person was running the KGB. And General Kalugin said that was unacceptable and gave orders, direct orders. We need to determine the identity of the person who was seeking to maintain anonymity. And once we've identified the person, we take control of the case. The KGB runs agents. Agents don't run the KGB. General Kalugin's words.
The KGB assigns a highly trained agent runner to manage its precious new asset in Australia. Yuri Shmatkov takes over handling the mole and reports straight to Directorate K in Moscow.
We do know that Smatkov, who confided to someone that I know, that he had some difficulties running the mole, that there was some disagreements who's in charge. The mole was from all intents and purposes, from what I understand, was a take-charge kind of a guy. He was confident, knew what he was doing. This was his territory.
So the Soviets mount a high-risk surveillance operation targeting their own agent. It's a battle of spycraft. The KGB successfully tracks the mole and establishes his identity. Finally, Moscow knows who the mole is and that he's head of espionage in New South Wales.
He had a good access, everything about Australia, the United States, mutual cooperation, political plans, agents planted in the Soviet embassy, surveillance squads, everything.
It's It's taken the Soviets months to identify their mole. Mira is 54 years old. He was an RAAF pilot during World War II who joined ASIO soon after it was established, along with many other ex-servicemen. He's one of the earliest recruits, the celebrated first generation known in the service as the Old and Bold. His treachery comes in the twilight of a 30-plus year career.
At this particular point in time, when this ASIO mole volunteered his services and betrayed his country, he was of critical importance. We know from General Kalugin's own account that he was the first mole recruited in ASIO. So they were deliriously happy about that in Directorate K.
In his office at the Soviet embassy, Shmatkov, the mole's KGB handler, devises an elaborate routine for the exchange of documents and cash using so-called dead letter drops. Shmatkov smuggles himself from Canberra to Sydney in a hidden compartment in the boot of an embassy car before heading to the pre-arranged drop location.
When they were sure that they weren't being surveilled, Shmatkov would roll out of the car, and then he'd just go to shopping centres or movie theatres until the evening. And most of the dead drop materials took place in the evening in parks and in wooded areas.
Sometimes Shmatkov uses diversions, like joining an early morning exercise group at Bondi Beach with staff from the Soviet consulate. He then peels off on what's known as a dry cleaning run, spending the day on buses and trains to shake any possible ASIO surveillance. As night falls, the Russian heads to the dead drop zone in Centennial Park to collect the latest stash of classified documents left in an agreed hiding place by the mole.
And what kind of material was he providing?
As far as we are aware, almost anything that could cross his desk that he thought it was useful, and especially Five Eyes material.
There was no doubt that the Five Eyes material was of particular significance back in KGB head office, but also in terms of any operations going on in Australia, this person had access to the details of basically all cases, all current cases, all ASIO activity around the Russian residency in Australia. Everything they're doing has been compromised by the mole.
In Moscow, the secrets the mole is betraying are so highly valued that the head of the KGB and later head of state, Yuri Andropov, is given regular updates.
Andropov was deeply interested, and this is, of course, not because of all of the Australian material, which is highly valuable, but because the mole had access to Five Eyes material. And it was a doorway, if you like, or a window into what was going on in the United States and Canada and the United Kingdom. For a few years, this was gold for them, metaphorical gold.
The cash used to pay the mole arrives at the Soviet embassy every few weeks from Moscow in a diplomatic pouch. It's labelled tobacco and contains fat wads of Australian $50 bills.
It was considerable chunks of nice Australian money and nice blocks of it, and very large amounts too, about every 5 or 6 weeks, you know. So that kind of indicates to you how many times, you know, there might be meetings, anywhere maybe from 4 to 5 or meetings a year or 6 meetings a year. But we do know that there were considerable amounts of material was passed in those meets.
And how much do you think he was paid over the years?
Don't know, but they were not going to scrimp on this guy.
His colleagues will later be gutted to realise that the secrets sold by the mole also include personal details about his workmates, so the Soviets could assess who else might be vulnerable to recruitment.
There was no question that the mole was providing all the data that he could on his work colleagues. Not just who worked in what section, in what area, and was responsible for, but where did they live? Photos of them. The details of their family. Looking for someone who's vulnerable one way or another, whether to be blackmailed or seduced or suborned.
For me to walk into that team and to have my file in the Kremlin expanded that far, because that's what this person would have been doing. They would have been giving chapter and verse, not just on me, but on my family, my friends, everything I did, my vulnerabilities in particular, because I would have been a candidate. What's this guy like? Can we recruit him too? This sort of thing.
So you're sure that the traitor would have been reporting back to Moscow on his colleagues?
That's what traitors do. That's what they do. That's why they're paid big bucks.
By the late 1970s, ASIO staff are growing suspicious that someone on the inside might be working with the Russians. Operations against Soviet bloc targets in Australia repeatedly fail for no clear reason. What they don't know is that their colleague is giving the Russians ASIO's surveillance priorities, as well as details of phone taps and operational targets.
We all felt, and people were complaining, that operations were going down. The expectations for a number of them apparently were quite promising, and then they would peter out. Among a number of people were feeling they're being compromised in some way, which meant there could have been a mole in the organisation targeting those particular areas.
In a typical case, ASIO is bugging the home of a Russian it's identified as a military spy. Midway through the operation, the target is suddenly relocated to the Soviet embassy compound beyond the reach of ASIO's eavesdroppers, as though he's been tipped off.
Very frustrating, particularly when you think that you've got an operation which is going to give good pay dirt and it just turns to dirt. That becomes very hard.
It was getting to be the norm. In the late 70s and into the 80s, the norm was that the operations were not successful. So there were prolonged periods where key Soviet officers were going undetected and getting away, breaking contact, essentially getting away from ASIO's surveillance efforts.
The fears that ASIO is penetrated reach Australia's Five Eyes allies. The US is so concerned it begins to restrict the flow of classified intelligence to Australia, and the CIA dispatches a new station chief to Canberra to investigate.
Michael said, "Now, this man was an operator. He told me several times his mission was to see if ASIO had been penetrated. And towards the end of 12 months, before he had to go home, he said to me he believed it was penetrated, but he never even intimated a name."
Still, no one suspects the ASIO mole. His behaviour gives nothing away. He joins his colleagues for Friday night drinks after work at the office bar. He's remembered as being affable and well liked by his workmates. But he rarely stays late, saying he has to go home to his wife.
ASIO was a bit of a club back in the day. You got recruited based on not what you know, but who you knew. So once you were in, you were good. There was very little by the way of double-checking or vetting or reviewing of security clearances or checking of bank accounts or checking for any kind of personal factors that might point to you having lost your morale or your sense of raison d'etre, your confidence in the cause. And people would excuse behaviour because there was, for quite a while, a fairly boozy culture in the organisation, a blokey culture in the organisation where everybody knew each other and everybody kind of gave each other a degree of benefit of the doubt.
The first concrete lead that ASIO is penetrated comes in mid-1980. The source is KGB Colonel Oleg Gordievsky, who's been secretly working for Britain's MI6. Gordievsky is regarded as the most critical source of intelligence out of the Soviet Union during the Cold War.
The information that flowed from Gordievsky, and there were 3 times that he provided information, He was the jewel in the crown.
Gordievsky tells his British handlers about the medal given to the former Canberra Station Chief Lazovic for recruiting an Australian intelligence officer. ASIO launches an investigation, but when they go to review their Lazovic files, they're in for a shock.
Apparently 19 volumes of Lazovic's files in ASIO had literally disappeared from the registry, and nobody would come up or could come up, at least publicly, with an explanation as to why these files had been removed or destroyed so soon after he'd just gone back home.
This is really unsettling. When they go to check the Lazovic files and the whole segments are just not there, completely missing and not signed out. So basically they've been destroyed by, what evidently a malevolent manner by somebody who's got access to the files. For information to just vaporise like that, it's outrageous. It's seriously outrageous.
The investigation into the Gordievsky lead goes nowhere. Inexplicably, ASIO concludes that the mole is not within its own ranks.
So the problem was that our principal national counter-espionage, counter-intelligence agency was dropping the ball on counter-espionage and counter-intelligence. They weren't good at their job. The fundamental task that ASIO had been set up for as spy catchers, they were failing in.
After 6 years of treachery, the mole reaches the end of his career in 1983. His workmates turn out for a drinks party at the ASIO office in Sydney. The mole bids farewell to his colleagues after more than 3 decades in the service.
How do you and the others who worked with him feel about him now?
Hate. Utter frustration at realising that the best years of my life were spent working for an opponent. Sadness for Australia and for this service that I worked for, which was a good service. There's an immense amount of loyalty and trust.
At the age of 60, the mole leaves ASIO on a full government pension. He's looking forward to a long retirement playing golf at his club at Balgala on Sydney's northern beaches, where he becomes a director. He must believe he's gotten away with the most damaging betrayal of ASIO's secrets in its history. What kind of damage did this mole do?
They would have been able to give away incredibly significant information about Australian technology, Australian plans, Australian relations with British and UK counterparts that would have been useful for the Soviets to corroborate leads, for them for exploiting potential defectors in the UK and the United States. They would have gained access to a wealth of hard-won information about operatives in Australia and abroad that would undoubtedly have compromised the operations that they were involved in, if not the lives of the people involved as well.
Then the Cold War ends, the Soviet Union collapses, and former KGB officers are giving up long-held secrets.
As you know, there's been a rash of defectors, particularly when the KGB was being rebadged and the Berlin Wall came down. There was chaos. And where there's chaos, there's opportunity. And the Western services took that opportunity and people were snapped up.
This is when the CIA and the FBI travel to Canberra to break the news that a second KGB insider confirms ASIO has been penetrated.
So the key comes with some information from the Americans, which is specific, not to the identity of a person. No. Wouldn't that have been helpful? But the fact that there had been a penetration of Australian intelligence.
ASIO sets up a top-secret mole hunt in March 1992. To ensure maximum secrecy, it's located outside ASIO headquarters. Investigators start identifying a list of possible suspects among their colleagues.
And then some information comes in from the British. That is where things can finally get started in earnest, because there are some coordinates in the material that is passed to the Australian Intelligence Services by the British.
This crucial breakthrough comes from another Russian defector. KGB archivist Vasily Mitrokhin arrives in the West with 11,000 pages of notes copied from the KGB archive. They include a copy of a document about the ASIO mole, written after his retirement by his KGB handler and sent to Moscow.
What was the critical information?
There was two pieces of information that were critical, but the most critical one was the fact that he revealed that the mole was the supervisor of the espionage section in Sydney, Supervisor SE, Supervisor Espionage, and that he retired in 1983.
But just as ASIO is on the brink of uncovering the mole's identity, the investigation takes a dramatic detour. The focus switches to an ASIO translator, George Sedil. He's been spotted at the Russian Orthodox Church in Canberra with a diplomat suspected of being KGB. Sedil is then caught on a hidden camera stuffing classified documents into his jacket.
Well, it was late at night. It would have been about 8:30, and perhaps even later. There was a banging on the door. My wife became very, very upset, and I opened the door, and then this burly bloke, he just slammed the door open, and he showed me the warrant card. And first thing he said, "Where are the documents?"
Sedil is charged with espionage, but it turns out the documents relate mostly to his looming retirement, and the case collapses. He pleads guilty to removing documents and receives a suspended sentence.
Was Sedil a mole?
No. No way. No way. There's no evidence whatsoever.
It's not fair to call it a wild goose chase. That's not fair to George Sedil and the people who worked on it. But there was no intelligence ever obtained and no evidence ever presented in a court that George Sedil passed material to a foreign power. No evidence of espionage.
Do you think they owe you an apology?
They wouldn't know what it is.
So did the Sedil case derail the mole hunt effectively?
It would have, except the Deputy Director General of ASIO was determined, as I understand it, to look under every stone. So other ASIO operational activities, I understand, were proceeding, or did proceed. Because remember, there was still the important task of identifying that original mole.
After losing valuable time and resources, ASIO investigators are now determined not to rest until they unmask the real mole. The critical information in the Mitrokhin archive enables them to cut down their list of suspects from more than a dozen to just 2.
There were 2 individuals who had very similar profiles, in as much as they each had at one time or the other been supervisor subversive or supervisor espionage, and that they both had been in Rome, but not at the same time, and that they had wives that worked for ASIO.
Piecing together the clues provided by the Russian defectors, investigators established that the mole was supervisor of espionage in New South Wales when he first sold out to the Russians in 1977. At last, ASIO identifies the mole. Finally, they have their man. The mole is Ian George Peacock, a senior operations manager in ASIO's Sydney office, where he was the head of counter-espionage against the Soviets. Here he is, in plain sight in a photograph featured in ASIO's official history.
So we now know that the mole was Ian Peacock, former RAAF pilot, supervisor of espionage in Sydney. What have you learned about him and his behaviour and the extent to which he fits the profile?
He fits the profile of an individual who was disappointed with his career and how it had unfolded for him. And he was, to a certain extent, somewhat bitter about that, and felt that he had been not served well. And I think that was a combination of the money and that reason.
Is there any doubt in your mind that he was the mole?
No. None.
What's it been like for the people who worked with this man to have to live with the knowledge that he betrayed them and betrayed his country?
There are people who have suffered clinical depression and require ongoing medical care. Is it solely because of this? Well, I don't know, but I would hazard a guess it's a lot to do with this. Some people are, who are aware of the assessed identity of this person are still in disbelief. They can't believe it. But the material which has been obtained from 3 defectors is overwhelming.
What would you say to the traitor now, if you could say something?
Probably hit him before I said anything. No, seriously. I'm extremely passionate about this sort of situation, and I want it to end.
Do you believe he was the only mole in ASIO at the time?
Yeah, I think so.
People have talked about there being 3, 4, 5, even a nest of moles.
Oh, yeah, I read that. That's nonsense.
Nonsense.
Yes, just nonsense.
So who was Ian George Peacock? He was born in 1923 in Hobart into a life of privilege. His father was Commodore of the Royal Yacht Club of Tasmania. He went to Australia's most expensive private school, Geelong Grammar. In 1941, he enlisted in the RAAF, aged 18, to become a fighter pilot. Evidently a risk-taker, military records show he was court-martialed for reckless flying, endangering life while training in Victoria. He was sentenced to 3 months in a military jail. Tragically, his father died by suicide in 1949 after battling mental illness. Shortly after, Peacock joined ASIO. How would you describe that initial generation that came into ASIO?
All the ones I met, and I met a great number of them, were very dedicated. They'd had a military or police background. Many of them had gone through the Depression as well. They were very loyal to Australia, and they were very determined to see the job done. But there's no real guidance at that stage either. So they wrote the books as they went along to a large extent in this country.
Initially, Peacock's career blossomed. He was appointed to a crack new surveillance team, the Operational Base Establishment, or OBE, to track Russian spies. Then there was a posting in Rome, before returning to Sydney with his family.
Equal pay now! Sisterhood is powerful! We shall not be moved just like a sea that's running out.
But by the 1970s, ASIO was in turmoil and out of step with social change. A hostile Labor Attorney General, Lionel Murphy, raided the ASIO headquarters.
Do you hear about phone tapping from ASIO?
It's the great number of unauthorised ones which are the concern. It's been going on for years.
Prime Minister Whitlam said later the raid was the worst mistake in Labor's first year of government.
Well, the Murphy raid was a disaster, not only for morale within the organisation, but also because it interfered extensively with what the organisation was doing. So it was a very backward step. For those people who had been working very hard and taking the risks and doing the hard work, they were furious, but there's very little they could do about it.
The military-style leadership of the old and bold was out. A judge, Edward Woodward, was now in charge.
The organisation almost went into hiatus. We lost leadership, we lost direction, we became confused. Many of the things that people had done and regarded as a major threat we were told was not so important anymore. I knew a number of people who subsequently, for a while, lost their enthusiasm. They were moving towards retirement. They were a bit fed up.
1977 was a tipping point. A Royal Commission delivered a scathing report criticising ASIO for illegal operations.
These public reports make it clear that his Royal Commission was no whitewash.
Morale was shattered, and Peacock's career had stalled. This was the year he offered his services to the enemy.
What do you think was his motivation?
In his case, it could have been money. It could also have been resentment because he'd plateaued at a middle management level. And I could understand why, because I don't believe he was a particularly talented manager.
Well, this individual is no longer with us, and so we're never going to hear the true answer. If the trader could even confront the reality himself, combination of ego and certainly money. Certainly what we're aware of from the personalities that have been speaking about this, and I'm talking about General Kalugin, Oleg Gordievsky and others, large sums of money were being paid.
Here's how General Kalugin described what he'd say to the mole if he met him.
I would shake his hand and say, thank you. Do you need more money? He was, after all, after money.
ASIO spends years trying to get Peacock to confess. They give him their own code name, Regatta, and meet with him dozens of times. In a last-ditch effort over lunch at a waterfront restaurant at Sydney's Middle Harbour, ASIO offers him a deal. They have no admissible evidence, and Peacock has denied everything. They offer him immunity from prosecution and a generous cash payment.
Well, I understand that in a somewhat desperate attempt to entice him to confess, and they showed him a briefcase with a certain amount of money in it. I have no idea how much. And legend has it that he grabbed all the money and threw it up in the air and stomped out of the restaurant. I mean, nice try, guys, but, you know, it just didn't work.
Is that legend or is that a true story?
In the world of intelligence, they blend at times. That's the story that I've been told.
Ian Peacock dies in 2006, taking his secrets to the grave.
The betrayal is a sad story, a story of sadness because it's a story of human frailty. So as a Christian, I look at the 30 pieces of silver, betrayal, and the despair that comes from it. The only winner is your opponent, the enemy, as I call them. We all want it to end. My colleagues, my former colleagues, want an end to it. We don't want this to happen again.
But it doesn't end there. There's an excruciating twist to the story revealed in the Metrokin archive and never publicly reported before. The mole was paid by the KGB to find a replacement.
The other key piece of information was that he was given $50,000 to recruit a replacement. Now that is SOP, standard operating procedure. If you're losing an asset, they paid him to identify a successor.
On the one hand, it's great news that the mole has retired. On the other hand, red alarm bells are going everywhere that he was clearly a competent operational person. That's to say, he had tradecraft and capabilities, and he was working to find a replacement.
The Metrokin archive named a younger ASIO officer who the mole approached to take his place.
When he retires and they offer him $50,000 to find a replacement, he goes out and approaches a young individual who had worked with him at one point in time, who we call Ken, and approached him. And Ken did not buy that at all and did not agree to that, but never reported the approach.
When ASIO goes to interview the younger officer named Ken, they learn he's recently died. But the mole told the KGB he had others in mind. So the burning question remains, is there still a mole in ASIO?
Do you still fear that the mole found a replacement?
Well, I think that's the holy grail of these Australian counterintelligence operations was to definitively resolve that question. And one day, hopefully, it will be definitively resolved.
It's now almost 50 years since one of ASIO's longest-serving officers first betrayed Australian secrets to the KGB. Decades of secrecy have seen rumours and suspicion flourish, tarnishing the reputations of innocent officers.
And it's extremely harmful to a number of people, and it really is shameless. A number of these people, these personalities who are banding around names, have no primary information to corroborate their allegations. And in some cases, unfortunately, it appears that names have been thrown around because somebody dislikes someone, or someone thought someone hadn't helped their career, but it's not right. And the people who have done this should hang their heads in shame, individually and collectively.
Details of ASIO's mole hunt are still closely guarded. A government review of the affair known as the Cook Report, delivered in the 1990s, has never been released.
It's never been resolved. There's never been any official clarity around it. Cook Report, Matroken Archives, anything to do with this is still suppressed. Do you think it's time now to give clarity to what happened so that we can learn from it?
The answer to your question is, yes, I think it is about time.
This was a grave national security breach, the extent of which is hard to fathom. I think we Australians are owed an explanation.
Well, if we don't learn lessons from the past, we're doomed to repeat them. The point is, we have an extremely aggressive Russian intelligence service operating to the same old rules, or lack of rules, if you prefer. It's alive and it's happening, and that's why ASIO needs to be on its game. The mole hunt is never over.